This 30-minute video has been adapted from a live PowerPoint presentation originally presented on Thursday, May 30th, 2024 in the Lane Room at the Burlingame Library.
Let's start at the beginning so you have context of the early period of the Mills and Easton families. Ansel Ives Easton, sometimes called Tony, was born in New York, one of 11 children. He arrives in California early in the gold rush in his 30s. In the summer of 1857, Ansel marries Adeline Mills, sister of Darius Ogden Mills, whose family had also arrived early in the gold rush. They marry the year of this photo, and on their honeymoon end up on a steamship bound for New York that sinks in a hurricane off the Carolinas. Of approximately 600 passengers and crew, 478 perish, along with about 30,000 pounds of gold. Adeline survives in a lifeboat, but Ansel is presumed lost. Fortunately, he's amongst 49 men who've been rescued by another vessel and turned up the following day. Having returned to California, in 1860, Ansel Ives Easton and his brother-in-law, D.O. Mills, each acquired part of Rancho Burry Burry from Jose Isidro Sanchez's descendants. The Eastons and Mills become the earliest resident American landowners in North Burlingame, while the W.M.D. Howard family to the south at Rancho San Mateo are the earliest resident American landowners in southern Burlingame and northern San Mateo. The Easton's property covered 1,500 acres from Crystal Springs Lakes to the bay, from what is now Sanchez Avenue to Mills Creek, just north of Adeline Drive. Here, the Eastons established Home Farm, later called Blackhawk Ranch. Because of the Eastons' interest in adobe-type construction used throughout California in the 1700s, Ansel built his home using adobe bricks from Jose Isidro Sanchez's dismantled home located near Sanchez and Laguna Avenues. Only the second story was constructed of adobe, while the first was made of heavy timber. This house collapsed in a major earthquake centered on the Hayward Fault in 1868. So having survived the maritime disaster, here we have Ansel Ives and Adeline Easton a few years later. Like many gold rush pioneers, Ansel may have also mined the miners. His occupation in the early 1860s, according to San Francisco city directories, is the steam laundry business at or near the San Francisco Presidio. Steam laundries were early large-scale industrial cleaning facilities that were steam-powered. The workers were largely women, perhaps one of the early examples of literal sweatshops. Whatever the case, by 1863, Ansel had enough capital to build a sophisticated racetrack on his North Burlingame property to showcase his racehorse breeding business. The horse depicted in this painting was named Blackhawk, an Irish stallion imported by Easton, and believed to be the first thoroughbred brought to California for breeding and racing. The Easton's Blackhawk property was named after this stallion. Shell Mound Park Racetrack, promoted as Estonia, was created on marshland at the lower end of today's Broadway. The base of the track was constructed using finely ground shells from Native American shell mounds on site, seemingly plentiful along the bay's edge, remnants from very early Indian settlements. At right is a rare image of the track stands. The Daily Alta California newspaper from April 17, 1863, boasted of the track. Quote, "The mile-long racetrack is destined to become the best and safest track in the United States, to be drained by ditches and floodgates to exclude the rising tide, complete with newly invented revolving turrets for observation. There is a system in place of electric starts and stops to prevent false starts and a platform with electric trip mechanism to record the exact position of each horse at the scoreline. There was a barn and stables facilities nearby. Even a hotel for visitors was in the works." But only 5 years later, in 1868, and not yet 50 years of age, Ansel Ives Easton passes away of lung cancer, leaving wife Adeline Easton and their two children, 4-year-old Ansel Mills Easton and his older sister Jenny. Before we leave the early Bayshore area, I wanted to point out a seminal aircraft event on the site of Shell Mound Park in 1869, the year after Ansel Ives Easton passes away. This photograph is of a 28-foot scaled model of a steam-driven airship known as Aviator Hermes Jr., developed by aviation promoter Frederick Marriott. It was tested at Burlingame's Shell Mound Park. The event is generally considered the first unmanned, powered flight of a lighter-than-air craft on this side of the Atlantic. Marriott intended to develop a full-scale version for passenger travel. Not long thereafter, the airship burned in San Francisco and was never rebuilt. You can see a model of this aircraft at the Hiller Museum in San Carlos. For context, in 1895, North Burlingame remained largely undeveloped. Local newspapers promoted new Chinese shrimp camp operations, leasing 5 acres of the Easton family property in the Broadway vicinity by Bay's Edge. The Redwood City Democrat newspaper reported in 1895 that the village employed 30 men and included 10 shanty houses. There were 200 funnel-shaped nets costing $10 apiece, 1 schooner, and 4 large boats. Shrimps were shelled, dried, put into sacks, and exported to China, with the public being encouraged to visit. Bury Avenue, otherwise known as Broadway, was the service road to the Easton estate that ran from the estate stables to the racetrack. The stately curved Easton Drive was used for family and guests. Lower Easton Drive was landscaped with eucalyptus, cypress, and pines by John McLaren in the 1880s, shortly after he'd landscaped El Camino Real, which was paved in 1913. The images at left and right show Easton Drive and El Camino Real in their early pre-paved period. The concrete bridge railing at center, constructed north of Adeline Drive and built over Mills Creek, is stenciled with the name of Easton Ranch, Black Hawk, and dated 1898. Along with the McLaren trees that remain, this concrete bridge is one of the few visible remnants from Easton's Black Hawk Ranch. It's important to put San Francisco Peninsula growth and development into context of the early planning and preparations for the Pan-Pacific International Exposition that took place in San Francisco in 1915. The momentum to pave El Camino Real in 1912 through 1913, for example, was due in no small part to the push for infrastructure improvements to prove to visitors beyond a shadow of a doubt that San Francisco and the San Francisco Bay Area had rebuilt itself and was better than ever, ready for growth and for people to settle and invest in the area. Here you can see Easton's Black Hawk Shire horses on display at the fair. Where did the Easton's driveway lead beyond today's Vancouver? We'd like to share with you a closer glimpse of this residence built circa 1890 by then 60-year-old Adeline Easton. Her home is the only Easton home on the Burlingame Ranch for which we have good photographic documentation. Hand-tinted images of the estate were made in 1911 by Charles Winslow Caldwell, a photographer and likely coachman for the ranch. These were donated to us by Cindy Easton, Ansel M. Easton's granddaughter. It is not known if the images were taken for a specific purpose. However, they help us to appreciate the expansive grounds and beautiful landscaping of the property. Here's Adeline Easton in 1911 on the estate. She's about 82 years old and has been a widow for 43 years, many of which were spent caring for her grandchildren after her daughter Jenny died at 29 years of age following the birth of her third child. In June 1916, Adeline passes away. A large portion of Easton acreage had been annexed to Hillsborough just a few months before. With a ranch of this size, we'd always been curious as to where this large home was located, and if any portion of it is still remaining. Using old real estate transactions along with the 1919 map of the Easton foothills that appeared to include the footprint of a large structure surrounded by a network of roads and trails, we are fairly certain we found the location of the former Easton home. In March 1917, the Easton family sold the home and 81 acres of the ranch to New York financier and polo champion J. Cheever Cowden. You can follow the sequence of maps and aerials while keeping your eye on given roads and landmarks that are marked and remain fixed. And here is the same site on a late 1920s map, surrounded by developing Easton area. By the fall of 1917, the new owner, Mr. Cowden, announced his intent to join the U.S. military as an aviator, and he started to subdivide his acreage over a couple of years. 33 acres of a former Easton estate, including the Easton home, was sold to Lewis Titus. In 1919, 28 acres to mining magnate D.C. Jackling. By late 1921, another 7 acres were sold by Titus to George Armsby. D.C. Jackling's Easton acreage was subdivided as, quote, Hillsborough Oaks, unquote, in 1932. He'd ultimately decided the Easton area was getting too crowded and built a home in Woodside instead, one that Steve Jobs purchased in the 1980s and demolished in the mid-2000s. In February 1920, 8 acres were sold to W.C. Van Antwerp for his future home. The Daily News Leader newspaper reported that the 8-acre Hillsborough land sale of $39,000 was one of the most expensive transactions at the time. At roughly $5,000 per unimproved acre, Arthur Brown eventually designed a notable Tudor home for the site, which was subdivided again over the years. More recently, the estate has been known as the Paul Fagan Estate. Fagan owned the old San Francisco Seals baseball team, and now the property is apparently being subdivided and redeveloped yet again. Here you can see on a current aerial of what is likely to have been the location of Adeline's home. The Jackling acreage became the Hillsborough Oaks subdivision in 1932. At the lower edge of this aerial image in a green outline is the comparatively small section that became a Hillsborough Ranch-style subdivision in 1948. Not coincidentally, it is named Black Hawk Ranch. For those of you familiar with the area of Downey Way, this is roughly where the Easton residence was once located. We have not yet determined when the large home itself was demolished. In 1896, Ansel Ives' son, Ansel Mills Easton, announces he'll retire from managing the Black Hawk Ranch dairy. By 1905, at 40 years of age, he begins to carve up sections of the family's vast estate. As mentioned, Ansel Mills Easton's only sibling, Jenny Easton, pictured here, died in 1887. In this photograph from the 1890s, Ansel Mills Easton, at right, chats with a gentleman we believe to be Charles Frederick Crocker, Jenny's husband, and Ansel's brother-in-law. Mr. Crocker died of Bright's disease a decade after Jenny's passing. Ansel Mills subdivides Easton Addition No. 1 in 1905. It encompasses the area from California Drive, then called San Mateo Drive until 1925, to El Camino Real and Bury Avenue, later called Broadway, to just north of Edge Hill Drive. In this early period, longer distance travelers used the railroad or 40-line interurban electric trolley that traveled between San Francisco and San Mateo by 1903. To assist in the development of his community of Easton, in 1907, Ansel Easton built a small station along the rail line close to Broadway. The same year, Southern Pacific Company completed what was known as the Bayshore Cutoff by tunneling along the eastern shore of San Francisco Bay to bypass the original 1863 rail line through Colma and Daly City. The system of 5 tunnels, 4 of which are still in use, shortened the travel distance between San Francisco and Burlingame from 13 miles to 10.5 miles. The project was hyped extensively by developers like Easton, who were banking on migration to the San Francisco Peninsula suburbs. A mostly friendly rivalry between the East Bay and the San Francisco Peninsula suburbs was evident from period real estate ads. Both yearned for investors. Easton's sales agent was F.J. Rogers & Company, based in San Francisco. Similar to the primitive Lion and Hogue real estate offices in Burlingame proper, the Easton sales franchise operated out of a shack near the little station by the tracks. Though the migration after the 1906 quake gave a boost to properties closer to Burlingame Avenue that had at least some amenities, early Easton property sales were not brisk. Subdivisions 2 through 5 on the west side of El Camino Real were plated between late 1906 and 1911, each getting further from rail transportation. Owning a car was still a faraway concept for most. Selling a neighborhood also includes building a school. Easton School, shown above left, was constructed on Cabrillo Avenue around 1909 in anticipation of a growing population. By 1919, Roosevelt Elementary School had been constructed. For interest's sake, we've included a 1933 image of Our Lady of Angels that expanded their original school by incorporating the defunct Easton School on site many years later. No known remnants of the original Easton structure remain, as of several decades ago. In 1908, Burlingame incorporated as a city. By late 1910, discussions were underway for Easton to become part of Burlingame, then home to about 2,500 residents. The reasons are nicely summarized in a San Mateo Leader newspaper from November 3, 1910, in which town officials explained benefits of having a large municipality. Burlingame trustee Lang spoke of experiences before Burlingame's incorporation, mentioning the non-success of securing necessary improvements. After incorporation, Lang said, the town gained jurisdiction of its sewers and streets, was able to lay sidewalks and plant shade trees. He added that it is the wish of the trustees to make a model suburban residential district, and that while Burlingame would not ask Easton to come into that town, it was welcome if the people of Easton wished to join. Believing the advantage would be mutual, another trustee added that Easton properties generated a small amount of tax, so there would be little hope of incorporating as a separate community for many years. The bottom line was, more taxes collected meant more infrastructure could be built to support both growing communities. And so, in the closing days of 1910, a majority of voters in Easton, then a town of 300, voted for annexation. Just 60 people casting their vote, 48 in favor, 12 opposed. In Burlingame, then a new city of roughly 2,500, 70 voted in favor and 1 against. But annexation was not a completely smooth transition. Just months into 1911, residents were informed that one post office sufficed for Burlingame, the one 2 miles south in Burlingame proper, and by 1912, Easton residents objected strenuously to the Easton area being referred to as North Burlingame, insisting the community still be called Easton. The dilemma of promoting the Easton property, particularly parcels west of El Camino Real, was one of logistics. Once having enticed buyers to the area from San Francisco, typically by railroad or 40-line streetcar, developers still had to be ready with teams of horses as the Little Easton Real Estate Shack to take prospective buyers out to look at property. And without a growing population and tax base, infrastructure improvements would remain slow. Motivated by inspiration or perhaps desperation to sell more property, in 1911, Mr. Easton applied for and was granted a franchise by Burlingame on July 24, 1911, to build and operate a battery-powered electric trolley that would bring passengers from Easton Station along California Drive to Carmelita to Cabrillo, then along Cabrillo to Hillside Drive, and to Hillside Circle at Alvarado. An initial planned route up Broadway was objected to strenuously by Broadway homeowners who worried about the noise and who didn't want the eucalyptus trees cut down on Broadway. The railway car was the first of its kind on the West Coast. 119 Edison storage batteries were under concealed seats. It was 27.5 feet long, 13 tons, and ran along 8,850 feet of single-line tracks, having a capacity of 26 passengers. The one-car railway required a 7-hour charge overnight and a 3.5-hour booster charge by the middle of the day. Initially, the charge was supplied from a cable connected to the powerhouse located at Hillside Circle, where the little brickwork shelter marked the end of the line. The powerhouse was later moved to California Drive. The initial run was on Saturday, February 22, 1913, and ran every half hour when batteries were not being recharged. It whizzed along level ground at 23 miles per hour, but slowed to 5 miles per hour up a grade. If it were loaded, it was even slower. On rainy days, the car would often stop in the middle of Hillside Drive. The motorman, Mr. Fisk, would need to pour sand on the rails to try and get it going again. In November of 1913, the San Francisco Call newspaper partnered with Easton and his agent, F.J. Rogers, to run free excursions from San Francisco via train or the 40 line to be met by Easton's railway system, to be taken to Hillside Circle to get out of a fog into the beautiful hills and have a picnic. The San Francisco Call ran similar promotions to new residential neighborhoods around the Bay, likely because real estate advertisements was a significant source of income for the newspaper. 500 people took part in the excursion to Easton, and the paper reported that $20,000 in real estate had been sold as a result. So let's imagine we are among 500 visitors in November 1913 to get the full fare paid to Easton for an outing on Easton's railway. What would we have seen out the windows 111 years ago? Thanks to a very special donation of a photo album containing a number of images by renowned photographer Gabriel Moulin, we are able to see some of what the excursionists experienced. At the upper left is an image of Gabriel Moulin, who was retained by Easton to capture imagery of the Easton editions, under development during the period circa 1913 through 1914, and it is due to his work in Easton that we have a much richer knowledge about this area of North Burlingame. A rare image of Cole Mansion can be seen off to the right, close to completion. Here is the same view of Hillside Shelter today. As you can see, where there originally was the park behind the trellis, the park is long gone, and there has been a cluster of homes for many decades. If you look closely here on Alvarado, the tracks may be visible as they veer north. In this image of the side of the shelter at Alvarado, the newly built Cole Mansion is off to the right in the background. This view was taken behind the shelter in the park, looking through the structure towards Hillside and El Camino Real. This is not a Mulan image, but it was taken in about the same period and shows women reading on the steps above Easton Drive where the circular brick wall was built, shown in the previous slide, now just a shadow of its former self. This brochure uses the Mulan images to promote the Burlingame Hills region. It notes that the prospective buyers will be offered automobile rides from Easton Station into the Upper Easton Addition and Hills as a convenience. Easton hired renowned landscape architect Mark Daniels to create a beautiful route into the Burlingame Hills. The San Francisco Chronicle in May 1913 described Daniels' landscape as a road winding about the hillside for more than 6 miles in length with various embellishments including stone bridges, seats, stairs, walls, and entrance gates. This view shows what is known as Canyon Road today. Similar to Gabriel Mulan, Daniels enjoyed patronage of rich and influential clients, having designed several Bay Area residential neighborhoods including Forest Hill, Thousand Oaks in Berkeley, and the 17-Mile Drive, among others. The drive also appears to have included what today is known as Summit Drive. Here you can see a Hillsborough home built a few years prior in 1909 with Daniels' stone benches built near the road off to the left side. In 1914, the same year the Burlingame Hills Drive was completed, Daniels was appointed landscape engineer in Yosemite Park, followed by a brief stint as general superintendent and landscape engineer for the entire National Park Service. Eager for a nicer train station for prospective buyers, Easton lobbied the Railroad Commission between 1914 and 1919. His small original station was to be removed in 1914 when the arrangement with Southern Pacific had expired, but there was no contention over the land's value and how much he expected the railroad to pay for it. This did not go well with the Burlingame trustees, nor the railroad. For the next 5 years, Ansel Easton, Easton residents, Burlingame trustees, Broadway merchants, and the North Burlingame Community Women's Club sparred about where a new station would go, how it would look, and the configuration of Broadway, pre-freeway era, that many wanted to see as a square-shaped terminus for parking, much the same as Burlingame Square by the Burlingame Station functioned, with a station structure located west of the railroad crossing. Records from the railroad are unclear as to the construction dates, but this early bungalow-style station was constructed on the east side near today's car wash, and by 1920 had been moved to the west side at the insistence of the North Burlingame Community Women's Club. Now part of Maverick Jack's restaurant, the stripped-down and reconfigured structure basic form is still somewhat discernible and is connected to a Spanish Revival structure next to it on the west side. Exact construction dates are unclear. In September 1914, the San Mateo Daily News Leader newspaper wrote of Easton's intention to replace his battery-operated trolley system with a standard modern gauge trolley, noting that the growth in that section of Burlingame was so rapid that the battery car has proved inadequate. In reality, Mr. Fisk, the singular motorman conductor seen in this image, had few passengers outside of Sundays, and in fact the railway was bleeding money, while the automobile was making its way into everyday life, and so there would be no expansion into the hills with yet another trolley system. In 1916, Easton applied to the California Railroad Commission for an abandonment of the line, which was granted on November 19, 1917, on the condition that Easton replaced the service with a 15-passenger, 40-horsepower Studebaker bus, which was much cheaper and efficient to operate. In April 1916, Hillsborough annexed the Ansel Easton Ranch property, and by June, Adeline Easton, Ansel's mother, passes away. In November, newspapers reported that, having outgrown the Peninsula Farm, Ansel M. Easton recently began looking for a new location. He chose the upper end of Sycamore Valley, lying against the southern base of the famous mountain. The Hillsborough millionaire has purchased more than 1,200 acres of hill and valley land at the foot of Mount Diablo in Contra Costa County for a stock farm and distinctive California home in the architecture of old Spanish homes. The ranch will be called Black Hawk Stock Ranch, the name by which his holdings at Hillsborough were known for many years. In September of 1916, a newspaper reported that the famous Black Hawk Shire horses of the Burlingame Ranch had won all 30 first prizes at the California State Fair in a clean sweep. Perhaps not coincidentally, by January 1917, with their namesake moving across the bay, a progressive faction of Easton initiated a campaign to drop the appellation Easton Addition in favor of the popular name North Burlingame, that just 5 years before had been vehemently rejected. This time around, the preference was to be associated with the thriving municipality of Burlingame, about which so much has been written and said in its favor. In September 1917, Ansel filed an application to abandon his Burlingame single-track railway. Only one car ever existed. The reason given was that the line, propelled by storage batteries, never paid the expense of operations and had been a constant source of loss. He promised to remove the tracks and pave the street if permitted to abandon the system, which was granted on November 19, 1917. Concurrently, Easton applied to operate a 40-horsepower, 15-passenger Studebaker bus from Broadway Station to Alvarado Avenue, taking the place of the trolley, so that Easton settlers had viable transportation. Easton proposed to charge 5 cents for each passenger each way and to make about 15 trips a day. The electric trolley ceased operations in 1918. This image shows 2 buses in operation rather than just one. Easton did build a beautiful California Spanish-style estate as planned and used the ranch for a stock breeding business with son-in-law Amos Ward. The stock market crash of 1929 was devastating to Easton, and by 1934, the family was forced to sell the Contra Costa County Black Hawk Ranch. They moved back to San Mateo County and kept an apartment in San Francisco. Easton died in his mid-70s at his home in August 1941 at 25 Baywood Avenue in San Mateo of pneumonia. His wife Sarah moved to Marin with her son's family and died in 1952.
The less you have, the more you have, of joy, carefree from sorrow. For when you've nothing in the bank, then no one comes to borrow. Ansel Easton's wife, Sarah Louise Adams Easton.